Have you ever thought about going overseas to do some volunteer work? Perhaps you already have. Do you know what happened to that particular project when you went back home to your normal life? Today, I'm bringing together a handful of people from across the world to talk about that very subject. Volunteering. Is it a good thing or not? Hello everyone and welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show. I'm your host Mark Philpott, and on today's show we have a nice exciting new development. It's the first Global Travel Channel podcast debate. Yes, it's a debate going on today, and I'm inviting 4 amazing people from across the world to talk about this very passionate subject about volunteering. Have you ever gone overseas and done some volunteer work? How did you actually find the organisation or project that you actually supported? What happened when you left? Did it all fall over? Did your money get put to good use? Do you even know where your money got spent? All these questions and more coming up on today's show. So let's get onto it and let's introduce you to my panel today. Okay, so welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show to Pip Jones, Ugarte and Jules Hatfield. Welcome, team.
Hello.
Hey.
Great to have you all back, and you were all amazing guests on my show last year. Yes, we've got to say last year now. We're into 2020, a new decade. Why don't we start off by just introducing everybody to the audience in 60 seconds. Tell everybody a little bit about yourselves and why you're so passionate about the topic we're going to be debating today.
Ladies first.
Ladies first. Pip, where are you going?
So, hey everyone, my name is Pip Jones. I'm a travel writer. I'm a podcaster and host of the Travel Goals podcast, where we talk about actionable travel tips and destination inspiration. My background is actually youth work, and I used to run a lot of youth projects, volunteer projects, where I took children from, let's say, more disadvantaged communities away on international educational experiences. So I do have a lot of experience with volunteering and projects, and I think voluntourism is a bit of a problem because there's a lot of unscrupulous companies out there. And I think whilst people's intentions are good, the economics of the situation doesn't always stack up. And often, there's a lot of inadvertent harms involved with, international volunteering. And, these can kind of, I feel, outweigh the positives. So that's kind of the angle I'm going to be coming from.
Okay, excellent. Now we'll keep going around the world. So Jules, you're next.
Hey guys, I'm Jules Hatfield, originally from Melbourne, Australia, but I spend most of my time around the world now, California, Bali, a lot of different places. Former high school teacher in Australia, and then over the last 10 years, I've worked in the non-profit sector. I've also run a responsible tourism and adventure travel blog called Don't Forget to Move with my beautiful wife, Christine, who's also been on the show. And podcaster, blogger, vlogging, pretty much everything within the travel media space over the last 6-7 years, but also a lot of work in mostly long-term community development initiatives at grassroots disaster relief organizations and various other smaller grassroots organizations. We've done a lot of volunteering in different spots around the world. So definitely passionate about volunteering and non-profit work, and see a lot of positives and both. So looking forward to the debate today to have a chat about those.
Great, thanks Jules. And Ian, what about you?
Yeah, so I am a plumber builder, teaching degree. I am a property developer and have travelled the world running marathons wherever I can, whenever I can. So I've done the 6 majors, now doing the 7 continents. I've only got 1 continent to go, which will be Kilimanjaro this year, the Kilimanjaro Marathon, where we summit at 6,000. I, in my time, have volunteered almost consistently for the last 27 years, including a long 3 or 4 month stint in Cape York, Australia. And that growth phase for me was pretty important, which is why I do say that volunteering is a good thing.
Okay, excellent. Just my background in this space, after 20 odd years in the global corporate space, I moved into founding my own not-for-profit organization out of Singapore. That gave me a direct insight to not only working on the ground in various countries across the world, but it also gave me a passion to understand the space. And I spent a lot of time actually, I founded a magazine called the Humaneity magazine. And the whole purpose of that magazine was to really become I guess, a platform where people could highlight the pros and cons of the whole humanitarian work, corporate social responsibility space. But before we go any further, I'd like to thank Jules actually for, I guess, inspiring this debate today, because it was during his show on my podcast show that we got talking about this, and this is where the idea came up with actually have a debate on it, because there is a lot of passion around this particular subject, and I think we're going to find out today why that is.
I'm Elaine Young. I'm in my 70s. I've been travelling the world, especially more so in the last probably 15 years, and I just came by volunteering by chance. And I'll get into that when I get into my debate. I'm a mother, grandmother, been through some trials lately, and well and truly come through. But anyway, I'm in here for the fours. I could easily go against as well, but in my debate, I'll bring that all up anyway. My volunteering has been in Cambodia and Laos.
Fantastic. Elaine, it's wonderful to have you on with us today, and I'm glad that between you and Nan, you worked out the technical difficulties. So welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Now, let's get going. And the first thing I just want to share with everyone, I've been doing a little bit of recent research on the whole volunteering landscape across the world, and it may not surprise you to hear that in the year 2017, 970 million people volunteered in some capacity around the world. Now, that's a fairly large figure, and it indicates that people are very much have a social conscious thinking about wanting to make good in the world. Our debate subject today is looking at whether volunteering overseas is harmful. We have two teams. Pip and Jules are going to discuss in the negative, and Anne and Elaine are going to talk in the positive. So to get things off in a negative way, Pip, I'm going to ask you to step up to the plate and tell us your point of view on this one.
So, as you've just kind of mentioned, lots of people volunteer abroad. Volunteerism, as it's otherwise known, is a booming multi-billion-dollar industry. And with that has become, you've got a flood of companies rushing in to kind of offer to orchestrate these placements for you. And all of these placement companies very often market themselves as, kind of sustainable, helpful, even crucial. But there's growing evidence that there's potential inadvertent harms of short-term international volunteering that can often outweigh the positives. It can kind of, sort of position communities sort of in a kind of like passive and grateful recipient type position, which kind of sits really uncomfortable with me, especially, if we're looking at, are the people that are going over skilled and qualified to be doing the international work on these so-called placements? So you've got these companies who are charging, in some cases, thousands of pounds for young people. There's a whole range of people that go, but a lot of these companies specifically target young people who are looking to get these kind of experiences on their CV or their university applications. They're charging them thousands and thousands to go over to, build schools, volunteer in hospitals, volunteer in orphanages. And many times these young people, they've got such good intentions, but they don't have the necessary qualifications, experience, in some cases, maybe emotional intelligence, to kind of deal with the magnitude of trying to build a school in Africa, and I feel like a lot of the time from the reports I read, the lovely host organizations kind of watch as these people kind of struggle to, work on construction sites and things like that. And very often they have to redo the work that these young people have done, which is kind of sad as well. And my feeling is, I feel like that money that people are paying, sending organizations, could actually be better utilised within communities to pay local workers to maybe work in, hospitals, or to, on construction sites to develop community programmes, etc. One of the more problematic things for me as well, just quickly, is a lot of these placements involve orphanages, and this is really bad because a lot of countries have actually abandoned the practice of having orphanages because it's not really good for the children. It's not good for their child development. And what's actually happening now is organisations like Save the Children are looking at orphanages in places like Sri Lanka and actually found that 92% of the children there had a living parent. So what happens is these organisations that are sending people over, obviously the orphanages are benefiting from this influx of money. So you're kind of keeping the orphanage going, with this kind of influx of money, because donors from wealthy countries, responding to, wanting to help and wanting to do good, actually funding this practice. And I just find it really sad and really problematic.
Pip, have you come across anything that indicates that things are changing? Like, you've obviously had a lot of experience in this space, but have you come across any particular projects where you maybe have looked at that a number of years ago and they've actually turned the corner and they're doing things better today?
So the programs I used to run involved applying for funding from the European Union, and we would then use that funding that was available to take young people on educational international experiences. And what that meant was we weren't charging young people to go and do educational programs abroad. And with that means it's more inclusive. So anyone could go. So we were often taking young people from very disadvantaged or communities. And because we had proper funding and proper contacts and networks through these European projects, we were partnering with really ethical, long-established community projects in other countries. So we were getting the young people to go over and participate in more educational programs and do sort of like low-key things. Like we did one that was a surf project and a beach clean. So we took a load of young people over to Spain and Portugal, and they learn all about sort of, keeping the ocean clean and a lot about marine biology. And we did beach cleans in the morning, and then as their sort of reward in the afternoon was surfing. But because it was a large, extensively funded and highly organised programme, like I said, we were working with partner organisations that were really established, and I feel like it was beneficial on both sides. So the young people didn't have to pay a penny to have this experience, and there was a small but positive outcome. We weren't expecting these 17-year-olds to work on construction sites or build schools or kind of take on these highly complex tasks. We were just doing smaller educational kind of mini tasks, and I feel like that was good for the young people as well, because it really helps their sense of achievement, because they're not taking on something overwhelming.
Terrific. Look, I think for a lot of people listening today, we're going to be speaking a lot during this conversation, I'm sure, about the term NGO, and a lot of people might not know actually what NGO means. And I just want to throw out some pieces of information that might be useful for people to understand how this whole landscape came about. The term NGO was actually created as Article 71 of the Charter of the United Nations back in 1945. And the term was actually created so that organizations outside of government realms were able to actually go and make a difference in the world without actually focusing on making a profit. So that's the history behind where NGOs came from. Now, it's grown in that time, and Pip alluded to this about how many organizations are out there today. Does anybody want to hazard a guess of how many registered NGOs are in the world today, out of the panel here today?
Just registered.
Just registered.
I would go for 1.5 mil.
1.5 mil, okay. Elaine, what about you? How many would you guess?
I'd have to go more than that, just when I think of just the amount I knew where I was travelling. If there's 970 million odd volunteers, I'm going to have to say you're going to be into maybe 100 million.
100 million registered organisations, okay. Jules, what about you?
I want to say less, because just from my experience, just because, I mean, I don't doubt that there's a lot out there, but just from my experience, having worked in a lot of grassroots organisations, it's actually quite difficult for a lot of these organisations to become registered, and a lot of them fly under the radar. So I'm going to say 400,000.
400,000, okay. Pip, what about you?
I'm going to go in with a little bet as well, and maybe say like 150,000, something like that. But that's
okay.
That's a wild guess.
Well, I can tell you that in as of 2017, There were 10 million registered NGOs worldwide. And
Wow.
in that particular year, people donated in excess of $2.6 billion US dollars to those organizations, right? So to give people who are listening today some kind of understanding of the size of the landscape that we're talking about, because when you go and volunteer, typically speaking, you're associating yourself with an organization that is collecting funds from people to do the work that they're doing, whether they be registered or not. And if we set aside the NGO landscape as a country, they would actually be the 5th largest economy in the world. And that gives you an understanding on how big this particular issue landscape is that we're actually talking about. Now, an interesting piece of research that I came across was that 80% of global citizens who were interviewed for a survey on the nonprofit sector actually agreed that NGOs make it easier for people to be involved in social change. People can understand that an NGO is about doing good in the world. This is something else we're debating that today. So there's just a couple of additional facts about the NGO landscape that we're talking about today and how that all got started. Pip, thanks for your sharing there. We'll come back to you because I'm sure there's going to be lots of other things. Let's flip to the other side now. And how about we hear from Elaine talking about the positive side?
Okay. Yeah. First off, I'd just like to let you know that my volunteering started just by accident, actually. I visited Laos on a friend's referral with the fact that I would enjoy Laos very much. I came upon a group called Big Brother over there. And what they were doing, I just thought was fantastic. And they were taking the children's artwork, and I'm pretty sure they're a registered NGO. They were taking the children's artwork. You would work with the artist and you would translate for them from the artwork to English. But these kids had to learn Laotian first. And I thought it was brilliant. So I came back to Australia and said, I'm going back and I'm going to do this. I love the idea. As it turned out, I got back there in July and hadn't really done my homework and ended up that they were all out of school, so nothing was happening. Disappointed, I became involved with the Women's International group, which, people put it on a different side of the bench because of the fact that it's women getting together and doing things. But they were raising funds for kids to come in and adults to Mahasau Hospital in Vientiane to have cleft lip and palate operations and also burns. They were organising that doctors were flown in for this particular. And because it's something close to my heart, I got involved. And there I met a lady who I was helping to organise. I wouldn't be there for the bazaar, so I was organising to pricing and things like that. And she asked me if I would do an inventory for their company, her son's company, which was out of Cambodia, which was Complete Plumbing Services. And that herein started my time with Muriel, who ended up is still a wonderful friend of mine and has done some amazing work. So after I came home, we stayed in touch. And one day she let me know that she was back in Cambodia, and she was now executive director of a children's centre in Cambodia. Not an orphanage, it was specifically a children's centre. These children do have families. They are children that have been on the rubbish dumps and scavenging. And the centre was basically for the children to come in, be educated, to sleep in the centre for 6 nights, and they must go home to their family because reintegration was very important. And it also became a registered NGO. My girlfriend kept a very good watch on it, and she invited me to come over and work with them. And first off, I went, Phnom Penh, no thank you. I'd been there for 3 days and that was not a place I wanted to be. I then got invited to go and see Best Ever Marigold Hotel, and I walked out of there and said, well, India, no, but I can go to Phnom Penh. And I fell in love with Phnom Penh. I ended up the first time, I went and I did admin work. She'd seen my inventory work, so she was very confident with what I could do. The second time I went there, I ended up, and I was doing 3-month stints. And the second time I was working with a social worker. I had been at uni. I had done Indigenous cultural studies and gender studies. So I worked with the social worker. I didn't make any huge decisions. However, he and I talked. He had a degree in social working and was doing his psychology degree. And on our talking, we talked on microfinancing, we talked on credit unions, etc., like that. He and his now wife got involved setting up like a credit union, and I brought back information on microfinancing, and he is doing a similar business now in Cambodia. Yes, these were all done by a friend and not an NGO company set up. I did have to go through specific things when I got there. I was walked through the place and there was specific rules and regs that I had to go through. During my stay there, we had 2 girls from Denmark that were from Rotary. And they'd come over expecting a centre that was going to be very poor and very sad and these kids having nothing. Well, I have to tell you, these kids that I work with had just about everything they needed. In fact, they were getting a little bit more than they wanted more, as we often know kids do. And they were in this centre from the time 6 was the youngest, and they were in this centre up until they'd finished any schooling. So it was up till university, and then they were giving funds to set them up somewhere outside of university. My girlfriend during the time, she set up like TAFE training because coming from the US, they were specifically asked that they know that they could be doctors or lawyers or accountants. And of course, these kids were in year 8 at 19, and you realise that vocational work was probably more viable as their family was looking for them to earn income. And also, the actual centre paid the parents what the children would earn scavenging. So they received a monthly income. It was completely holistic. They helped the families wherever they could, and that was part of mine. I was able to go out with a social worker and actually see what happened out there. I was saying about 2 girls who came in from Denmark, and they came in with about $750 that was raised. And these girls were great at the centre. They were only there for, I think, a couple of weeks. Their $750, they looked and they saw that there wasn't much that they could contribute these kids need. So I suggested that our social worker would perhaps need a motorbike. And how great, because he was going out over all these rutted roads out to the families to help them in any way he could possibly. And that was a no-no from Rotary. The money had to go into something that was going to be used specifically for the children. So, you know, I have to say as a that I don't believe always NGOs or some of the other groups have got the children's welfare or the people's welfare in mind. And I also have to say a lot of people on the touristy side doing it have seen where funding goes and then decide that they want to do it. Whether that's good or bad, but I just wanted to know that was a sort of a thing, a way to do that. And my volunteering led to my niece coming over, who is in her 60s, seeing what was going on. She decided to get involved when she went home. She's now involved with a group in Siem Reap. She's built a group of her own, and they work tirelessly at home in Perth during the year through their school. They are intellectually disabled children they work with, and they work, as I say, they fundraise, and they take a trip here and there and go over and do some sticks in the mud and things like that to give a hand when they've got money to take over there. So Yeah, from my point of view, I've seen some of the fantastic. I've seen the opposite side, and as I say, I could probably argue both sides. But my goodness, even if they go over and they're not capable, they take something with them. I guess I would imagine, if I think of Sakon, my friend, that I sat and talked to for 3 months, and he turned around and he said to me, Elaine, everything you have said to me, it is there in my brain, and I thank you very much. And for me, that was the hugest compliment. Mine was a non-paid. It was strictly off. I paid for everything I did. And I also, I worked from 10 till 2 rather than 9 to 5 because I was not capable. So I think we all take something, and I'm not sure whether it's, and I'm hearing what Pip said about where they're setting up orphanages, and I think that's so sad. But if we really do our homework, we can find out what's involved and what is there, whether we get involved with a tourist group or not.
Elaine, I think in terms of what you've just described is, and I'm looking at this from a psychological perspective, because I think one of the things that volunteering does give a lot of people is a massive psychological positive impact. And it just sounds like, listening to you there, in terms of what this experience brought to you, and putting aside for the moment the impact you had with those other people that you were connecting to, for yourself, how do you feel it changed you as a person after you walked away from that experience?
For me, I didn't go there with any expectations. I didn't go there to believe I was going to give anybody anything. I just went there to do, I guess I do that a bit in my life anyway. It was about me going over there and giving what I had to these people. I respected their culture. I had enough studies to learn about respecting culture. I had been in other areas of the world. I understand where to speak or ask is always the best way anyway. But for me, I guess it opens my eyes to that everything is possible on this planet, and that also nothing is as it ever seems. It's probably a bit philosophical. However, for me, I think that's, no one ever knows what's behind closed doors.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, fantastic, Elaine. We'll leave it at that for you for the time being, and we'll move on to Jules on the negative side, just to spray a little bit of negative dust on things, Jules.
All right. Well, first I want to sort of start off my point, having been involved in a lot of different non-profit projects, both some successful and some unsuccessful over the years, that my perspective, I think there's definitely, I agree with both sides so far. There's definitely some positives, and there's also some negatives. So hopefully this podcast definitely comes from more of an educational point of view as opposed to a shaming type of view. And I definitely agree that volunteering can be positive, but my question is at what expense, and that not everybody has the experience or the life experience or the understanding, perhaps like Elaine did in her experience. And so in arguing against volunteering, I think, Mark, your stats earlier about the fact that the 10 million registered NGOs and then all the other ones that aren't registered really just demonstrates the proliferation of the nonprofit sector. And that 10 million NGOs and the other ones unregistered are just fighting for the same resources, the same issues. And with the rise of volunteerism, what's become problematic, as Pip really highlighted, was that the flood of companies coming in and some of the short and long-term harms that can come because of that. And I wanted to talk today about limiting the opportunity for skilled local labour because of unskilled volunteers coming in and taking the jobs away. And that short-term volunteers require training, they require resources that can be taken away from the program. And often it makes the experience about the volunteer experience as opposed to the actual impact that they're trying to create. And that's quite an unsustainable method for a non-profit, because especially when you're looking at short-term volunteers coming in for a week or 2 week stints, that's a lot of retraining, a lot of resources going into that could just be going into helping the issue. They talk about terms like busy work, which is keeping volunteers busy just because they're paid for a program and because non-profits rely on that money. But that busy work is not really creating much of an impact or a positive difference. So that was one of my points. The other one was also looking at some grassroots type nonprofits, which has been a lot of my experience, and like I said, both positive and negative ones. But often grassroots nonprofits are run by individuals that have a great passion for helping, but often lack a deeper understanding of how to actually enact change, as well as an understanding of how to work in these cultures and these communities. And just because you're passionate about something doesn't mean you should create an organization and start taking large donations trying to help. And I think that the sheer number of nonprofits registered, and I would say there's probably just as many unregistered, really demonstrates that everybody's trying to start their own nonprofit and make a difference. And some people probably just shouldn't. And it's those sorts of organizations that take in volunteers. They're often mismanaged, they're misled, and they don't have really a good understanding of how to respectfully and appropriately engage a community and work out what a community needs. So, and that's not just on a grassroots level, that also happens on bigger scale nonprofits as well, in regards to nonprofits trying to hit their key performance indicators for funding and things like that as well. So that was one of my points. And Pip did talk about the sort of, I guess, the idea of the proliferation of nonprofits also helping, not helping, but harming some actual issues as well, with the case of orphanages, which is well documented in a lot of places. The idea that if you are working or if you're contributing to these orphanages, you're actually contributing to the problem. And I did a simple Google search for orphanage volunteer Cambodia, and the first 4 results are just all Google ads targeting you, trying to get you to enroll into programs that with registration fees that could help sponsor a kid in a properly local run organization for a year. And that's what you just pay for registration just to get onto their program before you even start paying crazy weekly fees and things like that. So I think with those sorts of organizations, the danger is in not actually working towards something that's trying to make a positive difference and getting, I guess, sucked into the business of volunteerism. Volunteering in itself is not a negative thing, and tourism itself, but it's this blend in recent years of this concept of volunteerism that's really sort of created this middleman of organizations that are skimming off the top. So I think that's where the real danger lies. For instance, and this is just I pulled this from a website, I won't name who they are specifically, but the first 3 points of their website was, it's an incredible and life-changing opportunity to fulfill your passion, realize your dreams of traveling and make a difference, feel what it's like when someone's life has been made better because of you. And those 3 statements really highlight that these organizations are focusing on the volunteer experience as opposed to the local impact. And I think that when an organization prioritizes the volunteer experience, that's when you need to look out, because they're the ones that are trying to give you a positive experience, but they clearly show that they're not taking into consideration the local impact.
Very good point. I would like to come back to something you said at the beginning of your sharing there, Jules, and that is this particular discussion we're all having here is no longer a debate. It's a round table conversation about this particular topic, because I think what's important here is that there is no right and wrong. There's an absolute opportunity for everybody to learn more about this particular sector that we're talking about. So thanks for highlighting that, because I think in this world we live in today, and it's fueled obviously by social media, that it creates divisiveness between us where we've got to choose one side or the other, whereas life's not like that, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that everybody's so quick to jump on one of those sides and to shame the other side. And I think that that's a big problem, and it's a big problem that enters this debate as well as other aspects, because people just, they believe they're so passionate about their view that they're ready to take down other people without actually taking the time to educate them. And I think that that's why a debate like this is great, because it does share both sides. And, as somebody who's spent a lot of time volunteering over the years, I can attest to exactly what Elaine was saying, that there's a lot of positives. Like it personally for me has opened up a lot of personal development and professional development after volunteering at probably not the most structured organization, probably one of the more negative ones that I talked about. In my first experience, it led me to pursue a greater passion for nonprofits. I went back and I got my master's in international development over the last couple of years. I've sought out a lot more locally run organizations and tried to do it the right way. And I know not everybody has 6 months to go and volunteer, and not everybody's going to go back and, do their masters and do things like that. But for me personally, that experience led me towards that, the mistakes and the pros and the cons. So, everybody makes mistakes in the beginning, and it's whether you learn from those mistakes and whether you work towards bettering your experience and those around you, because volunteering can create a lot of personal benefits for you, but that shouldn't be the main reason why you go there. And I think that if you start looking for that, then you're looking for the wrong thing. And I think that, like I said before, organizations that target that are the ones that are targeting the wrong aspect, because it's inevitable you will feel better helping people, but not if you go in with that mindset.
Yeah.
It's kind of like what comes first,
Yeah, terrific. Before we get on to Ian and hear his point of view on this, I want to talk about a couple of things that I'd like to throw out there to the group to talk about afterwards. And this is, I guess, another opportunity for us to put our knowledge and know-how into these parts of the conversation around this particular important aspect, I think. The first one is the regulatory position within the industry, within the NGO industry, and whether that's working today or not, and hearing people's opinions on that, I think is great. And the second point I want to highlight is, how has the NGO landscape evolved, and has it evolved? Is it outdated? Is there a new way of doing good in the world? And I've got some opinions on that I want to share with the group as well. But before we get to that general conversation, let's welcome Ian into the party now. And Ian, would you like to tell us why it's so fantastic to go out there and be a volunteer?
Okay, so, if we did go down the debate scenario, I would win this one quite. But it has turned into more of a discussion, and I'm glad that it has done that, because I do agree with a lot of the points that have been said as far as, the unscrupulous behaviour that happens within NGOs and the people that are focused on the money making rather than the outcomes that are coming on board. And in Cambodia, as a classical example, there's more money being spent in Cambodia than any other place in the world. And that's all, and that's via United Nations, and that's based on NGOs that, maybe not be quite effective. So on the lighthearted side of it, if you do volunteer and go overseas, you've got the possibility of catching a few bugs. So there's a weight loss ability coming in there. You've also got the ability to be away from your family. That's a good thing, I reckon, sometimes. But to be really honest, there's a number of different places that I've been that I volunteered, and the reasons I'll give of the advantage of why people should volunteer comes from those basis of knowledge of what I've done. Pip brought up something about skills transfer. So one of my earliest volunteering works was with Skills Across the World, which is a Dusseldorf Skills Forum, which was 1% of Lend-Lease shares when they publicly floated got put to the side, and they run the Dusseldorf Skill Forum. They send teams all over the world of volunteers who are skilled in their trade, and particularly trades, and they take a team over to different countries and they show the locals how to build. So we take tools over, we then show them how to use the tools, we show them how to build. So I did 3 months in Cape York, with the Indigenous community up there, and you want to see money being thrown at from an NGO perspective. Australia's a great example where it's an ineffective use of money, where Skills Across the World, they use the ability for me to show them skills, which isn't a cost base other than sending me there and paying for part of my fuel when I was there. And that gave me the ability to transfer knowledge, transfer skills, which meant that when I left, there was something in place. As Elaine said, something in their head, something to use and something to move forward with. From the social perspective, it was a great outcome because I got to take my whole family. We're there for 3 months living in, the outback, let's call it, and showing my kids what it is to be part of community, to be part of a social outcome that makes a difference in the world. Having travelled to Vietnam, Thailand and Cambodia only just recently, I'm not a fan of donating money to charity because I don't know where that money's being spent. So I spent some time with Christine, my wife, and a good friend of ours in those 3 countries. And it was based around sex trafficking, and you'll have to excuse me if I get really emotional because it was a really, really tough thing.
Oh, wow.
We are so privileged to live where we live, and to know that children at the age of 2, 7, 8, 13, whatever age it is being sent into sex trafficking because that's the only resource of money for the family is a really, really destructive thing for those families and those villages. So we spent a lot of time choosing where our money was going to go, and we certainly didn't spend the money and put it towards charities that were pulling someone out of the sex trade. What we concentrated on was putting it into those places that were stopping the cycle. So before the 8-year-old got sent away in that town, in that village, we chose charities that were showing them how to earn income without needing to send their children away. And one great example of that was a little town. There's 3 little towns. All the children go to one school, and they bought a plot of land and built an after-school care where they could get food and they could get some mucking around on computers because they had 1 or 2 computers, and they had games to play. And they also had the ability to show all the local farmers how to farm without using any pesticides, insecticides. And interestingly enough, they all said, no, you can't do it without it. And after 3 or 4 years, the average income in that town has actually raised by 15 to 20%, which means they're doing things sustainably, naturally, and there's a social change. And kids are now staying in the town, staying in the city, and they're sponsoring them to go to universities, which is a really great, awesome outcome. You know, the white, and this might be politically incorrect, but the white privilege thought of, I'm in a really good spot, I should go over and help other people because I can't. Well, I think that's wrong. Why is it that people in Fiji with no money have the happiest people in the world whilst we with all the money aren't happy? So I believe that the social exchange of understanding where happiness comes from, because I've been through that process of realising the money doesn't make you happy, and have that exchange. I agree that starting a charity for the need of starting it is an ego-based outcome. People that start charities are basing themselves of saying, well, I started this charity and I'm doing my good for the world and I want the public to know about it. And I've consistently said for the last 20 to 30 years that if you're going to go and start a charity, don't be stupid. The money's already been spent to start a charity on the cause that you want to support. So go and find that charity and support them. And if you're unhappy with that, that's because your ego's in the way and you need to probably step aside to that. You know, the ability to go over and volunteer in different countries and give of yourself is a payoff that you can't get from anything else that I've ever experienced before. And I think I'll probably finish and keep it reasonably short with the Dharma units, which you may know of something called a Vipassana. A Vipassana is a 10-day silent meditation. It's actually 11 days. They don't tell you about the 11th day. They're little cheeky buggers. And so you sit there in silence for 11 hours a day meditating. And when you turn up, there is no cost. You can donate whatever you think it's worth or whatever you afford at the back end of that, which goes towards paying for the next. So you're paying it forward for the people that come after you. And I volunteer a lot in there because this happens worldwide. It's all over the world and there's no monetary exchange whatsoever. Yet the happiness and the gift of being able to give and the gift of being able to see someone else that you don't even know, that you'll never meet, have an outcome because of your volunteering is the best payoff. And when you can get away from, and I've mentioned the word ego, and know that what you're doing is for purpose, then that's a great thing. But if you know, we start going into like who on earth would pay to be a volunteer? It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever, where you're paying an organization to make you a volunteer. If you don't have the skill set to be able to go and look and find somewhere or a purpose that's worth giving, well, I think you've got rocks in your head to start with, and those people will probably never benefit from volunteering anyway. But the true givers in volunteering, as Pip has already said, she saw some amazing things with what she's done, and Elaine as well, and all of us have had an outcome from giving in our time rather than giving money.
Brilliant. Anybody got any feedback on Anne's sharing there?
No. I think that really, like, even though we've got some flaws and against, I think really all of our perspectives are very similar, because, you know, like with our against argument, it's not about the fact that volunteering can't have a positive impact on communities, and it's not that it can't have a positive impact on yourself. It's just really that this sudden boom in volunteerism has made it dangerous in finding the correct organizations, which is what is really what's troubling. And I guess, like, the question really is, you know, does your good affect others in a positive way, or does it affect them in a negative way? And I guess that's really what it comes down to when it comes to finding an organization. And it sounds like we've all had experiences working in positive organizations that make us feel better and are also doing good. But there's a lot more out there that are also, well, not a lot, but there's also a lot of organizations out there that are doing the opposite. And it just reminds me of one of my first experiences working in disaster relief in Peru. This is one of the organizations that really got me started in working in the nonprofit sector. And it was life-changing for me as a 24-year-old at the time. But looking back on that experience, and I can definitely say that there were times, and this was a different sort of organization, there wasn't any paying, and it was very much like a community-based thing. But looking back now, I know that there were projects we engaged in that weren't helpful. And I know that at the time it made me feel good. But knowing now what I know that they didn't have the same impact that I thought that they were at the time. So, you know, I guess that's the question, you know, does your good affect others in a positive way or a negative way?
I'd just like to say, Mark, one of the things Ian mentioned there was just go and you'll find it. I had an experience when I went to Laos as I said, I got my seasons mixed up, and I was invited to a local restaurant that were having a charity. One of their employees his father had ended up in hospital from a motorbike accident, and they were raising funds. And I was at that, and we had a table of Irish and Australian people, and as you can imagine, quite a bit of drinking going on. However, and I was looking for somewhere to use my ability, and this young woman, Claire, the Irish Claire, she invited me to go and do some English language. She was having to go back to Ireland with her Laotian partner, and they had an English language little after school one that they were running, and I ended up going over there, and the boyfriend picked me up on his motorbike and took me out there and left me. He just left me. And I was teaching probably about 12 kids with no books or anything, and a young monk. And there where you've got to have the cultural awareness because of the fact that women aren't allowed to touch monks. So, you know, you can't have that touchy feeling, it's okay, dear, or anything like that. Just that, yes, you will find it.
Without trying to turn it actually into a debate, I'd have to tend to disagree with that. I think that we've never been more connected and resourceful in terms of our ability to connect over the internet and online. And I know a lot of these organizations aren't, but I would say that doing your research beforehand and actually trying to connect with the right organization is also very beneficial as well, because of course there are things that you can't, you know, that there's other perspectives that you get on the ground, but coming into a new place where you're unfamiliar with and having a better understanding of the right contacts to talk to and the right organizations to actually look at, because what you see online and what you see in person can obviously be different as well. But I would definitely encourage people to do more research before they go.
Definitely online, because you can do things like read testimonials, you can ask the right questions, you can kind of check unscrupulous claims as well. Any organisation that's saying things like, 100% of your money, if they are charging, is going to go to the community. Well, obviously that's not true, because there's going to be all sorts of administration and running costs, isn't there? I think whilst I think, you know, it's a really nice romantic idea of travel to go, just do it. For me, I would just personally just want to be really, really sure that I was connecting with the right organisations who are giving back to the communities in the best way possible.
Yeah, I think sometimes we lose out, though, on the ability of an organic finding of the right cause for the right reason. And, without being too spiritual, allowing the universe to find that place, And so if you literally go out stargazing or charity gazing or, volunteer gazing, you just sort of walk out the door and see what comes to you. Sometimes they're the best outcomes. I do agree. To go in blindly without and hoping to find something may not be the right thing, and doing some research. So what we did was we scouted and had 8 different organisations that we'd already done some basic background work on, like you said, and then we found one just by chance that was just amazing at what they were doing, and we'd never have found that if we weren't out gazing around looking for it.
Yeah, definitely. It's just, I guess we in the West tend to have the ability to try and romanticize things, and which is all good, but when we're talking about real impact and real lives, and I'm not talking about anyone's specific experience, like I'm not talking about yours, Ian, or yours, Elaine. I'm just saying the concept of sort of romanticizing this, just stumbling across this experience and having this life-changing moment, that's something that should be a byproduct of your experience, as opposed to, looking for that. Because, when you come into volunteering, if you want to make the impact, like that should be the first priority. And so finding those organizations beforehand means that you can connect with them and you can match your skills with the need in that community at the time.
I was going to say to Jules, I'm hearing what you're saying there. However, this was going back to 2005. Not as much ability to find things that you need. And also, a lot of NGOs want very skilled labour, which cuts out a lot of people that just want to get in there and do it. I had specifically done my research on Big Brother, except because, as I say, back in 2005, it's a bit hard to get information. And I had already decided to go with Women's International Group. So I was trusting, as Ian said, to go with the flow of things that I trusted.
I just think we've always got to be really aware. We're talking about having these transformative, life-changing, experiences, which, I certainly did, and it sounds like we all have, doing these volunteer projects and experiences. But I think we've always got to be asking ourselves, who are we doing this for and why are we doing this? If we're doing it just for our own personal transformative experience, is that going to be useful to the people that we're trying to help? Because I think whilst our intentions are good, we're coming at it from a very sort of self-absorbed position. I know we don't mean to, but I just think for anyone who's thinking about volunteering, I think you've got to think, what are the people who I'm looking to help going to get out of me volunteering? Because it turns out if you're not massively skilled in something, that's fine. But maybe, if you're not a builder, maybe don't try and go and build schools. Do you know what I mean? Because how useful are you really going to be? I'm going to say now, I would not be useful at building schools. I would be dreadful at that. And that's not to say if you've not got any particular skills, you can't volunteer. But this is where the research comes in. Look at what you can do and how best match you're going to be to an organisation, rather than being like, oh, I need this wonderful experience for my gap year. I need to hold up some small children for the Instagram. I need some small village children I need to hold up so I can be #blessed. You've really got to think, what value is the project, the community, the people? What are they going to get out of me coming over here and trying to help? I think that needs to be the starting point.
I'll just add really quickly. I think that's exactly the point that I was making. If you're going over to volunteer and you leave there knowing that you'll never tell anyone about it, that's probably the right reason.
I'd like to thank each and every one of you for your personal sharings there and your individual journeys and beliefs on that. It's been really, really interesting to sit back here and listen to you go ahead and share. I go back to the number of 970 odd million volunteers out there, and when I listen to each one of you, even though in general there's quite a lot of agreement, there's also some, I guess, discrepancies and differences in opinion. I'm just wondering if we multiply that by 970 million volunteers who are all going out there attempting to do good in the world, but with a different philosophy on how that goes. There's no wonder that we have the situation that we have in the non-for-profit space around the world, and that goes for not only volunteers, but those people that go out there and start their own organisation. I'd like to add my little piece into the mix of this conversation if I can at this point in time. As someone who set up and ran an international not-for-profit organisation which created and made sustainable projects in over 19 countries across the world, who engaged hundreds of volunteers from all walks of life and skill sets, from the corporate world, from the education sector, from the sporting world, I want to share here why I got it wrong, but why I needed to do it to find that out. And my story is a very simple one. I left the corporate world because I was sick and tired of corporate greed, corporate corruption, and the fact that my life legacy was going to be something associated with making shareholders of a multinational company extremely rich. That wasn't why I was put on this earth, or so I thought. So I decided to start my own not-for-profit organisation in the belief that I could go out there and make a difference in the world with my skill sets that I'd learnt from working across more than 160 countries in the last 23 years of my life, and adopting and using those skills that I had learnt to do good. One of the things that I didn't understand before I got into this was the diversity within the non-profit space that we've all heard each of us talk about today, and the things that are challenges, both from a volunteer perspective but also from running an organisation. And I think there's no greater emphasis in life in being able to actually do something on the ground and understand that impact, to be then one qualified enough to be able to say, hey, I understand where it all went wrong. For me, it was a very simple epiphany. After 18 months of running my non-for-profit organisation, I realised in speaking to many people around the world, those people that were very large philanthropists in the terms of a dollar sense, and people that were extremely well known at global levels in business, taught me a very interesting fact. And the very interesting fact was that the non-for-profit model that we know of today of taking donations and doing fundraising events is effectively dead, and that we need to look at a new way of doing this. So I immediately turned my not-for-profit organisation into a social enterprise, and that meant that going from depending on fundraising events and the generosity of the general public to donate money to my activities, I actually set up social enterprise business units where I engaged products and services, or I created products and services that were sold to the general marketplace that made income, and that income was then put to good use of doing these projects around the world. So instead of relying on the generosity of the general public, I relied on the expertise that I brought from the business world to create products and services that I could actually sell in the open marketplace to make a profit. An example of that was the Humaneity magazine, a publication that I created. I'd never been in the publishing industry before, but with subscriptions sold to that magazine as well as the advertising revenues coming from it, we made enough money to create the magazine through paid staff, and also to fund many of the projects that we did around the world. So becoming a social entrepreneur for me was a major step forward, because I was then able to utilize my skills as a businessman and not to rely on my ability to build a school in Cambodia, which I had no idea how to do. So going back to what Pip had said, using your strengths where those strengths have the ability to make a difference is something else that I think is very important in this whole game. Do we think that the charity-based model is ineffective in today's world, and is there a better alternative? What are people's views on that?
I'm happy to come in right away. Where you said social enterprise, have you read the book Social Business?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, well, I just think that is a great model where there is no shareholding or anything, because in the first company they allowed some shareholding, and he realised that when they reviewed it, that no, definitely none. And I think that Muhammad Yusuf, is it, or is Yusuf Muhammad?
Well, first of all, I'd like to get other people's views on this. Jill, what's your view on social entrepreneurship versus the charity model?
That's the way to go. I mean, if you look at, there's been numerous studies over the last few decades about how aid and charity is ineffective and it's not sustainable. And I think that having just personally been involved in a lot of projects that relied heavily on donations, it makes it incredibly hard to be sustainable and to plan for the future when you're one grant or one donation away from having to close or open a project. And so creating sustainable business is something that can ensure, like, non-profit sector needs to be looked at as a business as opposed to a handout. And there's been a lot of great models that have demonstrated that over the years, and things working as, social businesses or social entrepreneurships and things, programs that have helped supported that. So yeah, definitely in agreement.
Anybody else got a view on that?
I was just going to quickly say, I'm a big believer that they should completely overhaul this paying, huge sums of money to volunteer. I don't have all the answers myself, but I really think that's a massively problematic thing for me. And I just think that needs to have a complete overhaul, because I do not think it represents value to the people who are paying to volunteer, nor the communities that could actually do with the money themselves.
Ian, you had something to say there?
Yeah, so as you know, Mark, our business is based on creating, affordable housing outcomes for people in need in the country of Australia to start with. We've now gone to New Zealand, and Canada will be next. And our basis is that we are a social enterprise. So if we're under the Social Enterprise Forum that happened in New Zealand a couple of years ago, they wanted to define what a social enterprise is. And the social enterprise was essentially a business with a heart, something that actually is going out to do a cause, and is allowed to make a profit out of it. Now, one of the biggest problems we face is that, I do a lot of Facebook social marketing and to draw people in so that I can create more of this, so that we can get more housing out there. And ultimately, my main aim is actually to crush the property market in Australia so it doesn't get used as a commodity anymore. And people have the issue with making profit by helping at the same time. And the social enterprise space is an amazing space where people are doing really unbelievably great stuff with simple ideas and simple ways to fix problems. But we do have an outcome. Now, I'm a firm believer that the charity model is broken, the donation model is broken. And part of the things that we did when we were overseas last year was to set up a social capital fund. So that is, like a micro lend, a farm, we would actually buy a farm, we would hold the mortgage on the farm, and as the profit that one of these organisations was, or the local town was making money, they would then pay us off. Now, it's a donation from me, but my expectation is that every year I'm going to get paid 10% or 3% or 4%. And 1 year I'll take my profit, I'll take my capital back of 3%. But the next year I might say, well, actually, I don't actually need the 3% this year. So you keep it and you can have it, and I don't want it at any time in the future, but I've still got the rest of the money paid back for me. I am so strong around making sure that government doesn't put any more money towards this, and that the private industry is given policies and ways to be able to help without the need of money. So if you can come up with a great social entrepreneurship outcome that has a social enterprise start, then that's what we should be pushing for, not for putting more money towards outcomes.
For those of us that live in Australia, I've got to say that every time I walk in or out of a Woolworths store and see someone sitting outside with a tin asking for my loose change, I start to cringe, because that's the whole issue we're talking about here. Look, another thing I'd like to throw out there in the group, and I'm respective of time today, what do we think around the whole regulatory accountability side of the NGO space as it currently stands around the world? Do we see enough transparency on organisations, and do we think their regulatory frameworks are in place sufficiently enough to hold a lot of these organisations that I've heard people talking about today accountable for obviously the financial aspect of their doing, but also the psychological impact that they're having on volunteers and on the beneficiaries? What are people's thoughts around that?
I'll quickly jump in and say one simple point. You told me there's 10 million NGOs. Who has got the manpower and the ability to actually be able to go through and make sure they're doing the right thing every year? That's an impossibility.
My answer would have to be no. And following up on what Ian just said, yeah, that's would to even research would be just near on.
Oh, even if it was sort of like super clear, transparent, good frameworks in place, a lot of people from a volunteer point of view, how do you decipher that? as well. You know, unless you're sort of quite well versed within this space, you might not necessarily be able to tell if they've got good practices, you know, a good framework, transparency, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I agree with everyone else. I think there needs to be a bit of an overhaul and a bit of a change as to how things are done with NGOs.
If you just look at it from face value, which is these days just a Google search, the average person is not going to find, you know, the charity navigator, the documents, like the ability to find the back end documents to see, you know, is that a registered 501c3 charity in the US? What do their annual reports look like? How much is their CEO getting? Like, the average person is not going to look for that. They're just going to click, they're just going to do a simple Google search, and they're going to look for pretty pictures. And so, you know, in terms of regulation, I mean, exactly, there's 10 million registered, and there's probably that again unregistered. There's definitely not the resources all the time to hold those places accountable, which is scary.
What are people's views on the sharing economy? Do we think that's going to have an impact on the non-for-profit space?
We're doing it in Wales. There's a little initiative called Helpful Peeps. I think it's spread to a few other places like Bristol and stuff. And what people can do is post online to say, oh, hey, I need some, you know, I'm disabled, or I have these problems, or, you know, I need someone to help me fix a window, or I need these little jobs done. And then people can just donate their time.
Yeah, brilliant.
So it's people who are in need, who need these kind of little bit of help in life, and they can just post on this website. I think it might be an app now as well, and then people can respond. There's no money changing hands. There's no giant corporations. No one's getting charged to help. It's like you said, it's the sharing economy kind of doing its thing. It's disrupting the sector, and you can help people right now. You know, okay, it's not as glamorous as going to volunteer in Cambodia or Sri Lanka or anywhere like that, but it's doing something positive and kind and actionable right now, and you don't have to spend any money to do it. And I would love to see lots more schemes like that rolled out across the UK and indeed globally.
What's the name of that one, Pip?
It's called Helpful Peeps.
Helpful Peeps. Okay, cool.
When I guess you look at a lot of the things, the sharing economy, like initiatives that have started, and they could be as big as the concept of Uber or Airbnb, or as small as, you know, something low key like a classifieds thing like Craigslist, or like this app. You know, there's lots of different ways to model it, whether the company's making money or not.
Yeah.
And some have more of an impact, some have less, but I think it's definitely more of a positive way to put the power in the people.
Do you think what Pip just alluded to, and I think this has been part of the conversation today, is that there needs to be, for people really to get engaged in this whole volunteering concept, there needs to be a glamorous side of it for them? So, you know, if one can come back from an overseas jaunt to a place like Cambodia and say, oh, I went and helped all these little kids in Cambodia, and is that part of the draw card?
Well, I think what's difficult about that is it's a little bit of a catch-22. If you look at a situation like, say there's a nonprofit down in Guatemala and their goal is to build schools, and they need $10,000 to build a school, and a group goes down there to fund that project, and they spend an additional $10,000 in their flights and their accommodation. And so really that trip costs them $20,000. And instead they could just donate that $20,000 to the organization and build 2 schools. But unless they go down there and get that self-gratification or the photos or the involvement, you're not going to get even 1 school. And so organizations get caught in that model that they take on volunteers to give them these experiences so they can post about it, so they can then bring in future volunteers. And, you know, I guess that's the argument as well. Like, is that a good or a bad thing? If you get 1 school built instead of none, but you didn't get 2 schools built, like, where do you take, you know, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I guess, you know, like, I guess that's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as that 1 school that gets built doesn't negatively impact the community, because it is giving those volunteers an experience that hopefully they will then continue on through their own communities at home or further communities in the future. Plus, it positively impacts the community that they're in, even if they didn't get to build 2 schools. So,
to wrap up with today, I'd like to give each of you a minute or two just to, I guess, give a summarized conversation of your point of view of what you've heard today, whether it's either validated some of your points of view or whether it's actually inspired more questions to come out of it, and to give a kind of synopsis to your point of view today. So can we start off with Pip over there in Wales?
Yay! And something that really struck me was that idea of about, you know, what are people's motivations, and do we need to have those glamorous experiences in order for any schools to get built? You know, I sort of never thought about it from that perspective before, and it's kind of sad but true, isn't it? And this is where the quandary lies, because obviously volunteering is good and we want to do good, but we just need to make sure that we're going about it in the right way, and organisations are going about it in the right way. And I can see now how they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, because how do you incentivize people to donate money? Because people do need that gratification, don't they? It's why charities attach themselves to marathons, because you know, people aren't going to donate £500 to cancer research, but they might raise it if they run a marathon and they get a medal and they get the photos and the Instagram, you know. So I think it's a real difficult position, and I guess I didn't really think about that before. So that's really challenged some of my assumptions about things. So I'm really grateful that we have this talk today. Yeah, thanks everyone for your really interesting points, and I've certainly got a lot to think about.
Thanks, Pip. Over to you, Jules. We'll go around the world again.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my perspective and my point of view stays the same. I think that, you know, from the point of view that this discussion is really about education, and it's not about shaming people. It's about really getting people to understand how they can impact a community. And I think that, you know, it is a good reminder to, you know, the non-profit sector can be quite a cynical sector, and it's a good reminder that, you know, it's okay to have those personal experiences and to seek that gratification. But I guess it comes down to that simple question: is your good affecting others in a positive way or a negative way? And that really comes down to doing your research, finding the organizations, really digging deep and finding out what they're doing and how they're contributing to a better good. And if that's the organization you want to tag yourself along with. So yeah, good discussion today.
Thanks, Jules. Elaine.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks for inviting me on this too. I'd just like to say this has opened up something for me in the respect of, and I'll just quickly explain that here in Brisbane, there's a group that is fundraising for homeless women over 55. And I was a bit disappointed, but I was a bit disappointed to receive an invite to a $130 cocktail party. And I thought, my goodness, that is just outrageous. But something Pip said about gratification was, I realised later they have an auction there. And possibly it's not something I would buy from, but by giving the $130, there is people paid for serving and doing all the things and food and everything like that. I just didn't feel the two lined up. But however, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt because of the fact that they raised something like 50 or 60,000 for these women. I'd rather send the homeless women to it. But however, it just gave me another perspective on it. And I'd like to thank you all for that.
Thanks very much, Elaine. Wonderful to have you on today. Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that we've discussed today it has opened up a lot more for everyone, and I'm sure people listening will be thinking exactly the same thing. And I think I basically go back to the same process. The charity model and the donation model and the NGO model is broken. It needs to be fixed. And the way to fix that is by ensuring that those people that come up with social enterprise, private investment ideas that can make a profit are supported by cutting down the red tape and the legislation and the policy around them. So what is it they need to be able to become more successful so that they can actually reinvest their money into the cause that they're going for? And so, you know, it's a really strong point of mine to make sure that it's okay. So I call myself a socialist capitalist. It's like mixing a cat and a dog together, but it is possible and doable. And so, and I suppose I'll finish on the last point. This started as a debate and ended up as a discussion. So if we took it back to a debate, the only measurable part of what we said today was guessing how many NGOs there were. I was the closest, so I declare the affirmative of one.
Staying true to your colours. Staying true to your
Right,
colours.
naughty little sausage.
I don't know. I nearly gave it to Pip on against when she said about the gap year. I thought that was brilliant.
I think that on behalf of the rest of the group, I'm quite happy to award Ian the Sweet Pea Award for today's conversation, because that's what we all decided that the winner was going to be called today. So well done, Sweet Pea. You've done it. Nailed it. Now, before I let everyone go, Elaine said something before that inspired this last part. Has anybody in the group, or has everybody in the group, got a book recommendation that you'd like to throw out there for people to go and read about the NGO space or volunteering or anything? Any good reads out there that people should get their hands on?
Oh, mine would have to be Banker to the Poor to start with.
Banker to the Poor, yep.
Sorry, I might just jump in. I think I might add, not a book, but watching, if you haven't already watched it, First They Killed My Father. It's really the start of the downfall of the NGO and how United Nations has handled it over a very long time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Pip, you got one?
Yeah, Ken Bird's The Voluntarist.
The Voluntarist, yep. Okay.
It's a really good one.
Jules, you got one?
Yeah, it's a book called Dead Aid by Dambisa Moore.
Dambisa, yeah.
Yeah, she's a Zambian author, an economist, and great book. It's called Why Aid is Not Working and How There's a Better Way for Africa.
Yeah, it is good. Okay, and my one is going to be Leaving Microsoft to Change the World by Michael Woods. He's the man behind an organization called Room to Read, and that's quite an inspiring read as well, how a corporate executive guy put his skills to work in creating libraries around the world for young girls, basically. Okay, well, we've come to the end of the show, and I want to thank you all for a wonderful conversation and collaboration around this particular topic. I want to thank you all for your time and energy, and also your sharing of your educational experiences in this space. It's been great, and I hope all the listeners today take away something for this, and it just makes them think a bit more before they actually go out there and do a bit of volunteering next time and try and change the world. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
And everybody else. See you.
See you all again.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
A big thank you to N. Ugarte, Elaine Young, Pip Jones, and to Jules Hatfield for participating in the first Global Travel Channel podcast show debate, which ended up being a roundtable. I hope you got something out of that if you've either been on a volunteering experience overseas or you're about to go. Let us know. We're interested to find out what people are up to and how you found it. Any other comments that you'd like to put forward in relation to anything we've discussed on the show today, just leave us a note on social media. Be happy to read it and find out what other people are thinking around this particular topic. Very interested to hear from both volunteers and from people that are organising NGO organisations or actually work for an NGO organisation. It'd be great to hear from you and get your point of view. Okay, well, that's it for another episode on the Global Travel Channel podcast show. Remember, if you want to check out all of our previous episodes, head on over to our website at www.globaltravelchannel.com. You can find all the previous episodes there. If you want to download our episodes, you can find them in places like Apple iTunes under the podcast section, at Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and even on our Patreon page. So head on over to the website and you'll see the links to all those destinations I've just mentioned, and you can download them and listen to all of our episodes in your own free time. If you love our content, tell a friend, a family member, or even a work colleague about the Global Travel Channel podcast show. We want as many people around the world listening to our podcast as possible, and we'd be very grateful if you did that. Okay, well, that's it for this particular episode. My name is Mark Philpott, and until we meet again, I wish you all a happy and safe bon voyage.